Containing Multitudes. Last week, I began by saying that the previous week had felt like about a year long in terms of the amount of emotion and experience that had been crammed in. But whereas last week was brimming with purely devastating events, this week, for the first time in a long time, I'm looking back and feeling hopeful about change, and change in ways that I've personally despaired of happening. And so it is perfect timing that my guests this week, Miriam Kabakov and Rabbi Steve Greenberg, have been making change that has seemed impossible to make for the past couple of decades. We're going to have a conversation called Changing, Not Changing: How Orthodox Jewish Communities Respond When Members Come Out as LGBTQ. And because I teach at an Orthodox Jewish university, I have personally seen the results of the work that Miriam and Steve have been doing in the lives of my students, and also in the transformation of the culture that they reflect and come out of year after year. I think that this is an incredible time to be able to talk about this crucial work. Miriam Kabakov is living her dream as the executive director of Eshel. She has a background in social work, organizational development, social research, program evaluation, fundraising, and she has a passion for community building. Miryam is the editor of Keep Your Wives Away from Them: Orthodox Women, Unorthodox Desires from North Atlantic Books. And that is a collection of writings about the challenges and joys of LGBT Orthodox Jews. I was kind of grandmothered into that, and that's how I got to know Miryam. Previously, Miryam was the National Program Director of Avodah, the Jewish Service Corps, coordinator of LGBT programming at the JCC Manhattan, and the first social worker at Footsteps. Rabbi Steve Greenberg is an Orthodox ordained educator, writer, and speaker who's led the call for LGBT inclusion in the Orthodox world. In 2001, Rabbi Greenberg appeared in Trembling Before God, an award-winning documentary film, and really a world-changing documentary film about Orthodox gay Jews. And following the film's release, coordinated with the filmmaker, Sandy Simcha Dubowski, an educational outreach program using the film in the US, Canada, Europe, South America, and Israel. Rabbi Greenberg is also the founder of the Jerusalem Open House, Jerusalem's first gay and lesbian community center, and a faculty member of the Hartman Institute of North America. He is the author of the award-winning and profound and wonderful book, Wrestling with God and Men: Homosexuality in the Jewish Tradition. And among the rabbis who are also wonderful writers. And that book won the Correct Jewish Book Award for Philosophy and Thought in 2005. And he's founding director of Eshel, an Orthodox LGBT community support, education, and advocacy organization, where he works with Miryam. Steve lives with his partner, also named Steve, and his daughter Amalia in Boston. Miryam and Steve, welcome to Containing Multitudes. It is an honor and a pleasure to have you here.
A pleasure to be here.
Thanks for having us.
I am delighted. I'd like, as you know, I'd like to invite each of you to tell us a bit about your lives, to the extent that that has led to and informed the work that you've done around LGBTQ inclusion in the Orthodox world. And Miryam, would you like to start?
Sure. Thank you so much, Joy, for having me here. It's such an honor and a pleasure. And it's so nice to see you. Hopefully I'll see you in person real soon. So I'll just introduce myself by telling you a little bit about my story and my background. I grew up in Manhattan's Upper East Side in a modern Orthodox community, and I went to a modern Orthodox day school. And I have 5 siblings, and my parents sent all of us to a yeshiva day school. And we all came out representing the various shades of orthodoxy. So I call it, different shades of Black. And the way that I learned about religion and about practice in Orthodoxy was that it was very much something that is very personal and not so dogmatic. A lot of my teachers happened to be Baalei Tshuva, and they had all gone through their own personal evolution. And the way they taught and gave over,
I'm sorry, Miriam. I just wanted to interrupt because some of our listeners are not Jewish and some are Jewish but don't have the same vocabulary. So you've talked about shades of Black. I think some people would really love to know what sorts of shades that might be. And also a term like Baalei Tshuva is a crucial term. And if you could, I hate to slow you down, but I think it's important so that people really understand what the stories you're telling.
Thank you so much, Joy. Yes, I'd love to be as accessible as possible to everybody. So thank you for stopping me and reminding me of that. So a Baal Tshuva is somebody who did not necessarily grow up with religion, but came to it later in life and discovers it more as an adult, possibly. So those were my teachers, and they had lived their lives out there in the world, and a lot of them had arrived at this modern Orthodox day school to teach the rest of us how to, appreciate and love Orthodoxy. So that was the lens through which I learned about my Orthodoxy. And the message that I got was that it actually belongs to me. And even though it's a tradition that is handed down from generation to generation to generation, and we actually are following what we have received, it also has to be relevant, and it has to be something that we can live by. And in the Torah, it says we will live by this, the chai bahem, and meaning the laws of the Torah are something that we actually need to be able to live our lives, with. And as I slowly came out to myself as a young girl in a day school, and I realized over time, I had prayed and prayed that I would change and that I would be different. It wasn't going away. I was still attracted to girls. I gave myself a certain time frame, and I said, by this time, if you're not engaged to be married, as all girls of my in my social circles were doing, then I had to do something about it. And so,
Miriam, can I ask you a question? And please, this is a really personal question, and please feel free to not answer it. You do not have to.
Okay.
But I have a personal interest in the prayers that queer religious children pray. I mean, I have my own anthology of them, and I'm wondering what were you praying for, and what was in those prayers, or what prayers do you remember?
That's a great question, Joy. So there's certain prayers within the traditional liturgy where you can stop and insert your own personal prayers. And while I can't remember exactly like when I did that, or exactly at which points, but there are points where you can insert your own requests. And so I think my requests were that I be able to be attracted to boys and men, and that I be able to get married and be happy doing that and have children. And it just, I gave myself time. I went to many, many different therapists and rabbis, and I was taking advice from different people. And, one rabbi said, you have to go work with children so you could develop your feminine side. And once that comes out, you will then be attracted to men. I did go work with children. It actually changed my life. It was in Israel, and it was a year of national service. But in the end of the day, I was, still falling in love with the other girls of the national service program, and it wasn't working. So in that way, so I was trying, I was hoping, and then I said to myself, well, if God is listening to me, and if I'm not changing because of all I'm trying to do to change, then possibly I was born this way, and this is the way that God wants me to be. And what am I supposed to do with my life now? Like, I cannot live the life that I was raised to live. What now? What do I do now? And so, I just remember feeling like,
Can I ask you a question about that?
Uh-huh.
Because you begin your story with being taught by Balei Tshuva. And there are also people who've decided to live their lives in a way that they weren't born to. You were born into Orthodoxy, so you were born into that, but your teachers who were transmitting Orthodoxy weren't. Was their example helpful to you in coming out to yourself in this way, or was it really like two different?
No, so that's a really good point, that I like the model for me was, that every person is an individual. Like no two people look alike, no two people have the same gifts or talents, and God made us this way to live out our lives, to fulfill a purpose and a mission. And the school that I was connected with in Israel, after high school, I went to learn in Israel, and I went to this program of with a similar philosophy, like it took in a lot of people that were not religious, and they were learning to become more religious. And the school honored the gifts and the talents that each person brought. So my brother actually went to the same school, and he came in as a photographer. And they said to him, we want you to learn in this yeshiva, in this program, but we want you to live out who you are as an artist. So they actually gave him a dark room. Like they created a dark room out of a closet for him. And they said, please go keep doing your thing. And he did. And so he really flourished there, and I did too. And, I wasn't talking to them about being gay. And I think that now they're probably dealing with that in a more real way, but this was a while ago. So, but in my head, I knew that God wants something from me, and God doesn't want me to kill myself or to really be a miserable human being. And I need to figure out a way to make these two things work. So what I did was I was beginning to explore, and I was, I went to Stern College, and which is an Orthodox college for women, which is where Joy teaches. And then I kind of escaped from Stern. I had met my first girlfriend, and it was feeling just ridiculously dystonic and hard to live in the dorm, being in love with another student there. And I ran away to California, and I surrounded myself with a new set of friends and new people, also Orthodox, some and some not. And I met a group of women there in Berkeley who were also all had returned to Judaism, or who had decided to convert to Orthodox Judaism, and they were all gay. And it was like this remarkable circle of women who, they looked at me and they were like, starving to learn about how you be an Orthodox person. And they thought I was really sweet. I was this stern girl, and I could teach them about Orthodoxy. And I looked to them to teach me how to be a lesbian. They had been there, they had, lived that life, and I needed mentors. And so, one summer I was going back to Israel to visit my family, and one of the women said to me, there's this new meeting happening in Jerusalem, and I want you to go and go there and just meet these women. They're really remarkable. They're all lesbian, bisexual, or trans women who are Orthodox. And I remember for the first time in this little apartment in Jerusalem, walking in, opening the door, and all these women are sitting around, and it's kind of dark and candlelit, and it's like this beautiful weave of women. And the first person that I saw was one of the administrators from Stern College, who had admitted me to the program. And I was like, what on earth are you doing here? And she said, I'm doing the same thing that you're doing here. And that community had become my life. For 2 years, I came for the summer, and I stayed for 2 more years. And I met, all of these Orthodox queer women. And then I came back to New York, and I pursued my master's in social work also at Yeshiva University. And during that time, I started a similar group in New York City called the Orthodykes of New York. And these, every month, it was a monthly meeting, every month, a new crop of women showed up in addition to the group that had been there the last month. And it grew and grew and grew. And there were hundreds and hundreds of women who came in and out. And then I met Mara, my partner, and I moved away from New York. And then I decided that the story of these women has to get told. So I put out a call for work, and a lot of things conspired to have this happen very quickly. But this anthology came out called Keep Your Wives Away from Them, Orthodox Women, Unorthodox Desires. And that's how I met you, Joy, and a lot of other amazing women. And so this book has a bunch of stories, and I still get really sweet little notes on Facebook. Thank you so much. You know, I'm 18 years old. I just came out to myself. This is the only thing that I could really find that spoke to my experience. So what I'd like to say is that, you know.
Wait, I just have to, and a couple of notes. One is, anybody who has been listening to Miryam now knows why I love teaching at Stern and why I've taught at Princeton, very posh schools, and there's nowhere I'd rather teach than Stern. And that sense of purpose, the sense that you were made for something and your life should mean something, that you're hearing in Miryam's story, that animates so many of my students. The other thing I want to say is that Miryam became a hero, and not just an editor of mine, but a hero, when I learned that she used the occasion of publishing this anthology to create a national tour of events. So Miryam went on the road with this book all around the country to some very small places and found spaces, sometimes people's living rooms, right? Sometimes there was a bookstore, usually not a synagogue space, but where the book could become the beginning of a community, the basis of a community of people who identify strongly as Jewish and Orthodox, and also needed to talk about what it meant to be a lesbian or queer in some kind of way. And when I watched you do that work, I thought, oh my gosh, I just admire this woman so much. So, sorry to interrupt there.
Thanks, Joy. No, thanks for reminding me about the book tour. I actually, Facebook reminded me that 10 years ago last week was the book had come out. And for 2 years, we went around the country with the different contributors and different regions of the country. And so many different people showed up, non-Jews, you know, people who were very religious from other religions, people who had left religion. So it was really an interesting experience meeting people in all different places. And it was thrilling and exhilarating. So yeah, thank you for reminding me of that time when I could actually go anywhere at any time. And so, yeah, so out of that, you know, sort of started this idea for what Eshel is now, you know, has become, started to germinate in my head. Mm-hmm. That this is actually something that we need to, like, everything that I didn't have, I wanted to see happen through this organization. Mm-hmm. So for me, you know, I was lucky to find community, and really fun celebratory community, like people that I just love till today and loved coming out into my own with. Mm-hmm. In celebration. So now we have this incredible national retreat that we gather people once a year at a retreat center, and there's over 100 people each year, and we celebrate and we are joyous, and we mourn the loss of what we thought we were supposed to be, but more than that, we actually are happy to be together and happy to just really find kindred spirits and people who love their religion and their orthodoxy. And people say to me all the time, like, why don't you just become a conservative Jew? Well, what's wrong with Reconstructionism? Like, you'll be accepted there. And that's like telling, you know, a dog, why don't you just become a cat? Like, you know, like, it's true that some people do leave orthodoxy and find other places, but for people who really love, you know, the aesthetic of it, the commandedness of it, and the rigor of Orthodox Judaism, it's just not the same to say, like, why don't you go find something else? So like our slogan, our fun slogan at Eshel is, we're here, we're queer, we're machmir, which means, machmir means strict according to Jewish law, like you take the stricter version. It's kind of just a joke. And I add on to that, and we are not going to disappear. So for me, like, I had a choice. I could have left Orthodoxy completely and just said, hey guys, you're right. This isn't for me because you're not accepting me. But because of my upbringing, because of what I was describing before, that wasn't what I had learned. I had learned that it belongs to me. No one's taking what I have that is so important for me. And also it created my identity. It was part of me and made me love what I believe in, and it gives me, like, incredible strength to live my life. My faith gives me strength, and no one is taking that away from me. So we create spaces to celebrate together so that people can really find a place where it doesn't not make sense to be Orthodox and gay. It actually makes perfect sense when you have a community to do it with and to celebrate with. And then I also saw that my parents had nowhere to go. When I came out to them, boy, were they like hit by a, like a tornado. They were like, wow, we don't know anybody like you. And you are going to be probably lonely, and you won't have children, and you won't be able to live the life that we thought you were going to live. And boy, are we really sad, and we're scared. And all they really needed was to talk to other parents. So, part of what we do at Eshel is we provide a place for parents to come together to meet each other so that they can have community. And our parent community has become like, they are family to each other. They will go to each other's cities and spend Shabbat together, or spend a weekend, or they go to each other's children's weddings, or whatever kind of thing that they're celebrating together. And the beautiful thing about the parents for the work that we do is that they have become the major agents of change in their community, or at least awareness building. When a kid comes out, when they go to college, let's say, this is like a very typical trajectory. A modern Orthodox kid will go to college.
Actually, hang on 1 second, Miriam. I
Sure.
totally want to talk about that, but I want to move that into the next part, which will be about how change happens. That's a crucial piece, but I wanted to also make sure to give Steve a chance to tell his story before making that shift.
Terrific. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold the piece about the parents for that later discussion, because that's really what it's about. It's about change making. So I think I'm going to pause there, and I'll pass it on to Steve.
Thank you.
Okay. Firstly, thank you, Joy. This is an incredible opportunity for just, for us to just think through how our personal narratives and the broader question of change kind of dovetail. So I was like Miriam's teachers. I grew up conservative, not in a traditional family, and at the age of 15, I was swept away into the Orthodox community in Columbus, Ohio by early mercurial English rabbi, and ended up going to Yeshiva University, loving it, just totally enjoying being part of these two communities, the intellectual community where I was sitting around a table kind of figuring out what it means to be a human being and to do goodness and to choose and between right and wrong, and to choose between two goods and two evils, whatever. It's like it was the depth, the intellectual depth across thousands of years was incredible. And then belonging to a community of practice. I just basically 15, 16, I became went to YU. From YU, I went to Israel. And anyway, my experience was that I was, a frum kid. And then at the age of 20, I discovered that I'm attracted to another guy in Gush Etzion. So
could you just explain from, because I don't think Miriam used that term.
So from is just a Yiddish word for pious. It kind of is used in the Orthodox community as observant and religiously committed. And there I was at this, academy in Israel, and I was attracted to another guy in the yeshiva, and I was terrified, and I didn't know what to do. I wasn't going to go to my teachers. So I went to the most right-wing Orthodox rabbi I could find in Jerusalem, who people said I should go to. He's a great counselor, and with Yosef Shalom Elyoshiv. He was in his 70s or something. And anyway, I came to him in the most right-wing Orthodox community in Jerusalem, and I said, Master, I'm attracted to men and women. That's how I understood myself at this point. What should I do? So in Hebrew, he responded to me, Didi Karim, my dear one, my friend, Yesh koach ahava pi shnayim. You have twice the power of love. Tishtamesh b'zeh b'zehirut. Use it carefully.
Wow.
So it's like, I was astounded. I thought, what a thing to say to me. And I said, does the master have anything else to say? He said, af mila yoter lagila. That's all I need to say to you. I danced my way back to yeshiva. I thought, wow, twice the power of love. I'll make a good rabbi someday. I was not asking him if it was permissible for me to have a relationship with a man. I was asking him if this feeling inside of me was ugly.
Mm-hmm.
I still didn't, I thought I was attracted enough to women to make that work too, but I was aware of my attraction to men. and he tells me that there's nothing ugly about your heart. So that was the first thing that I was not, my first experience with this more radical Orthodox frame was this engagement with the depth perception that this wasn't ugly. And then the second story that I think
just wanted to
makes,
pause and highlight one thing about this, because it's come up with in a couple of conversations, is one of the things that people look to culture in general and to family, but especially to religion for, is how to name themselves, right? How do, if, you know, if someone knows, religion is about imagining somebody who knows the innermost truth about who you are, right? This divine being. How do I look? What is the name for a person like me to somebody who knows me inside and out? And it sounds like you're saying that's what this rabbi gave you.
Yes. I don't think that I was looking for permission. I was looking for self-understanding. Later on, of course, that changed. And fast forward, I moved to New York City. I became a rabbi. I studied rabbinical school. I dated a lot of women thinking that I could push through this and refusing to accept that I'm gay, because, as Miriam hinted at, is that even the language of to say you're gay to yourself when you've been given no good future, all the good futures are straight, means to be at the edge of a cliff. Like the statement to yourself, I'm gay, means that all the futures you've ever fantasized or anyone has ever offered you are all gone. And so I resisted it for 15 years. Finally, I'm in New York City. I'm living in Riverdale, and Yom Kippur, the verse from Leviticus, that difficult verse, and with a male you shall not lie the lines of a woman, it's an abomination, is read in the afternoon service. And for 9 years, I suffer through listening to that with my tallis, my prayer shawl over my head, and then one year I just got up and I took the aliyah, which means that I went up to the place where the Torah is read, and I stand there and make the blessing, and I present myself in front of that verse. And I think my intention is that if I am totally vulnerable to the text, then it has no choice but to be vulnerable to me and to everybody like me. And at that moment, I realized that if the rabbis who make sense of that text have ever heard my story, our stories, they have no idea what the verse means. And that was actually then a role that I needed to play for myself. I didn't know what the verse meant, but I did know that our stories would shift its meaning, because no one can make sense of a verse if you don't know who is carrying it on their shoulders, who is wounded or crushed by it. If you've never met those people and heard those stories, there's no way you know what the verse means. So that lifted me up and challenged me to move forward and to begin thinking and writing.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but basically your book is all about that verse. I mean, that's the way that I read it, as this extraordinary unpacking of not just that verse, but all of Jewish tradition in relation to that verse. So it seems like you fulfilled the calling that you felt when you made that aliyah.
Well, yes. I mean, the aim of the book was not to come up with a final halachic justification, a justification of Jewish law for everything that the LGBT community would want. My aim in that book was to claim that it was not a fool's errand to hold on to the fullest portrayal of Jewish tradition while being self-acceptingly gay. That was my aim. And, I hope it has moved the conversation to that space. It's certainly, I'm hoping it served LGBT, particularly lesbian folks, an opportunity to claim space, to claim, as Miriam as well said it, I'm here, I belong here, and God gets that, and I'm hoping the community will too in time.
When I read that book, and when I think of it in relation to the story that you just told, it's reminding me of what Miriam said about shades of black, that varieties of orthodoxy. And both of you, I think, are revealing not in a formal survey way, but revealing how many different forms of orthodoxy and Orthodox community and Orthodox institutions there can be. But when I read your book, Steve, I felt like I learned not just what you said about the Torah, although crucially that Torah verses, their meaning has to take account their effect in the lives of the people who read them and embrace them, who take them as the Torah as the tree of their lives. That's part of the meaning of the verses. But also, you placed the verse in the context of so much history, so many cultural shifts within what's often portrayed as a static or homogeneous tradition, that without going outside of tradition at all, it seemed like you portray that as a dynamic living thing in a way that, usually is the what you see on the T-shirt of Reconstructionist Jews. And I'm wondering, is that something that I'm projecting onto your thinking? Like, is that a misreading of somebody who is not Orthodox understanding what you're doing, or is that true? Is in your wrestling with this, have you come to see orthodoxy and tradition in dynamic historical ways that don't represent schism or invalidation, but that's part of the vitality of it?
I think there are, orthodoxy is, it's just not a single monolithic thing. In fact, it is likely the most diverse denomination of all of them. There's no one in charge of Orthodox ideology, because no matter what they claim, you have the most radical distinctions between Maimonides and between the Baal Shem Tov. You've been with Hasidic thought and philosophic thought. You have radical distinctions, but in geographies and in location, cultural frameworks, and even ideologies that are all considered Orthodox. So my claim would be is that within Orthodoxy, there is ample room for claiming that when circumstances shift significantly, the application of a mitzvah in the Torah has to be responsive to that. And that is hardly heretical. You can find it all over both the Talmudic literature, rabbinic literature, and the medieval literature. Is that, yes, in this context it made sense, in this context it no longer quite makes sense. And so it's not that the law runs out of steam, it's that it transforms its applications in light of the moment in which it's heard. Hayom b'kolot tishmo. The Torah is given today if you hear it. And it's, there's no way a text remains eternal. On some level, its eternality depends upon its ability to be alive in different ways in every moment. And so I don't believe this is Reconstructionist. I do believe that, there are limits of that process. That and the limits of that process are both structural and, I would say, sociological. And I think that, that it may be that trusting every whim of a culture in its move is troublesome for traditional systems. If the truth is that all change is good, then you're going to be in trouble if you want to hold on to memory. So I think Orthodoxy, yes, is hesitant in that regard, but there's no claim that could be made that it doesn't actually move in response to new realities.
Yeah, I also want to add that I feel like Orthodoxy is only as good as its leaders, and it is a decentralized system. And we have this database of 175 rabbis that we've engaged with in dialogue about their LGBTQ members or their inclusion policies. And, the responses there's 175 different responses. And, each rabbi has their own place where they, there are areas that they're really comfortable with and things that then feel like unfamiliar to them. And so our job is to tell our stories and tell the stories of the people that they actually work with and, things that they need to hear so that they can expand the frame of community. And, and it's remarkable also, like what rabbis, we did a study of our parent community that rabbis will tell them something one-on-one, and they will not say that thing publicly. They will have a very accepting stance and more understanding and trying to really be open to the experience that the parent is telling them about their child. And they want to make it work in a certain sense. And yet they will not broadcast that outwardly. And that, I think, is because of, the network, and feeling like they're afraid that other Orthodox leaders will look at them and say that they're not really Orthodox anymore if they're going to accept an LGBTQ person.
So, yeah, a lot more to say. I think we have officially transitioned into the, I guess consultants call it theories of change, like what you've learned about change in the Orthodox world. And I hear, I have two things that I wanted to highlight from what Miriam just said. But before that, we got a question from someone who said that her wife, when she came out in the late 70s, she initially felt she had to choose between being gay and being Jewish. Did Miriam ever feel that kind of dichotomy?
So there was never like 1 second in my life that I thought I shouldn't be Jewish. Now I sometimes fantasize, oh, what would it be like if I could do X, Y, or Z that I don't do now? But in that moment of in that time of my life when I was sort of like stuck in that conflict about, how am I going to live my life as a gay person? I never thought I should not be Jewish. I had thought, and I almost never thought I shouldn't be Orthodox, honestly. I thought maybe I shouldn't be alive, because if those are the choices, and then I was like, well, that's not an option, because that's not a Jewish thing. To take your life is not a Jewish thing. We're not allowed to do that. So if I have to live my life like this, God must want me to live my life like this. I don't know. I know it sounds like some Orthodox people would be listening to me being like, oh, she hasn't read the Torah recently, or, she doesn't know about the halachot. I do. And it's impossible to live your life as a gay person pretending that you're straight and being fulfilled and happy and calm and giving to society and a full member of society. It's almost impossible. And believe me, I get warm line calls every single week of people who are suffering inside themselves because they are still trying to make those two things work. They are still trying to be straight when they're gay, and they want to stay Orthodox. So I'm hearing it every single week, the thing that I had, 20 years ago to deal with. So yeah, I don't know. Sorry, I went a little bit far afield. I never thought that I wasn't going to be Jewish. I never thought I wasn't going to be Orthodox. And that was my personal theory of change, that if I leave, Orthodoxy will never change, will never move the needle. And so what we do is we try to empower people to feel like there's hope for them to stay Orthodox. Now, a lot of people say, Miryam, I'm really sorry, I can't do it anymore. And I say to them, go, do what you need to do to stay healthy. It's more important that you stay alive than stay Orthodox right now. Maybe one day you'll come back. And at our retreats, we see people coming back. They go away because they can't deal with it. They can't live their lives. They can't stay healthy. They can't take care of themselves. But they miss it. They miss the community. They miss the songs. They miss the food. They miss the culture. They miss their friends. And then they come back to the retreat, like, for example, or a Shabbat together. And they're like, oh, if I had this growing up, then I'd be okay today. So what we try to do in those spaces is create a place for them to have the utopia that they should have had when they were little. Where all parts of themselves are included in this community. And it gives them hope when they leave, and then they stay connected to each other, and they create their own little sub-communities. And a lot of Eshel folks do create a new life for themselves after they've met each other in this one event. So that's very special. So that's what we're doing for the LGBTQ folks. For the parent community, our theory of change is this, and I know there are some parents on the call, and I bet you guys will have something to say about this. that we invest a lot in our parents, because this is what I was saying before, that when a young modern Orthodox person comes out eventually, usually it's like in college, right? And because that's when they sort of have freedom to explore a little bit more, become themselves. And then they come back home and they come out to their parents. And then they think, can I go back to the synagogue that I grew up in, that I had my baby naming, my bat mitzvah, my bris, my bar mitzvah? Will I be accepted? Can I be a full member? And then they kind of realize, wait a minute, maybe it's not going to be so easy. So eventually, sometimes what happens, unfortunately, is that a lot of Orthodox people who come out leave Orthodoxy. But the parents are left holding the bag, then themselves needing to come out about their kid to their community. And they can have the choice, either I, as a parent, will remain in the closet because the kid has just passed on the big secret to me, and the kid is like free to like live their life. But I, the parent, am now, what am I going to do? Am I going to tell my rabbi? Am I going to tell my friends? How will they treat me? So it's a very interesting parallel process that the kid now is the parent is experienced, the kid has passed it on to them. And now the parent is left with that dilemma for their own identity as a parent of a gay child. But more than that, are they going to continue to be the advocate that they always were for their kid? Because as parents, we are our children's advocates. And so in the Orthodox synagogue that they live in, are they going to tell the rabbi that he needs to accept their child when they come back from college? Or, celebrate the milestones in that child's life, whatever they may be? Are they going to, is the rabbi going to treat that kid the way that they're treating the other family members? So we invest a lot in our parents. We want them to meet each other. We want them to talk to each other, to strategize, because they're not leaving. Very few of our parents have moved physically because of their child. There have been a few, but they stay put. And then they have to find a community that works for them as a parent of a gay child. So they're in their own way, that we teach them to tell their stories, to feel like they have a right to do that. And then for their community to have to accept that. Now, I'll also just say another thing about the theory of change that we've been working with, and that is that the leaders are the last people that we try to work with. It's really like strengthening the grassroots, strengthening the people who need the most help and the most support, so that they have a voice. Because a rabbi isn't going to listen to me or Steve talking about, oh, you should accept gay people. The rabbi's like, who are those gay people? They belong somewhere else. They live somewhere else. They're actually not in my community. But once they know that there are gay people within their community, very, long-standing members of their community and pillars of their community, they really actually have to deal with this reality. And so whatever they think about halakha or about that one verse in Leviticus, they actually have to start really rethinking.
I want to highlight just a couple of the things that you said there. One is something that this will be tangential to you, but when I started teaching at Stern, for me, that was my first experience of traditional community. Americans say community all the time. I brush my teeth and I'm part of the dental hygiene community. And these are not real communities. And I'd never actually heard of or gotten a glimpse of what living in a real community was like until I met my students and started hearing about their lives and realizing that for them, in some modern Orthodox institutions, so on the modern side, they were the way I had been, autonomous agents. They're responsible for their own lives and happiness and all this kind of stuff. But in a way that I wasn't, they saw their identities as being bound up with their family's identities and with their community's identities. They didn't feel that they were just atoms that were responsible to go off in the best direction for themselves. For them, they had this whole other dimension of self. And I would have to reckon with that during my gender transition, when I realized that changing my identity, the way I was living myself, was affecting everybody in my family. It's not, I really was not an individual who was a free radical in that kind of way. But what you're highlighting is that while some of the kids can make different choices, the parents who stay in those communities really do experience, I know my children are part of my identity. What they do I want to be proud when they do something good. I feel ashamed or angry when they do something bad, even if it's none of my business, right? It's this kind of over-identification, but that's an idea of community, which is normal. I think, secular, democratic, capitalist, atomizing ideas of self are relatively recent innovations. Most human communities have people define themselves first from the outside and then from the inside secondarily. So that kind of conflict that you're talking about is something that has, that's endemic to human communities, but it's not that common in secular American society. The other thing is that you're saying, and that I've seen over and over again, is that the most, and this is going to sound like a bumper sticker, but it's not, that the most powerful change agent in communities is really love. And I think it's really the love of the parent for the child that is the most powerful thing that communities can't afford to ignore, parents' love for their children, because that's actually what maintains communities, is parents who love their children enough to raise them and go through whatever that takes so that there's another generation within the community. A community that turns its back on parents' love for their children is just not going to survive for very long.
Right.
And children have the luxury of going in and out of identifying strongly with their love of their parents. But for most parents, we don't feel like we have that choice. I mean, there are some people are different, but I don't feel like I have that choice with my children. I feel like I get dragged kicking and screaming, maybe, where they go, because I'm not willing to let go of my love for them. And in some ways, I think that's how, parents can change communities also. Steve, I'm sorry I took up more space than I meant to, but.
So the themes that are kind of swirling around here are all related. I would say that it's love, but it's not only about parents. I mean, what I've discovered is that educators are deeply committed to the well-being of students. And, it's kind of why the chief rabbi of England worked for months and months behind closed doors to create a document, which is the guide for the well-being of LGBT plus pupils in Orthodox schools in England. That language of being concerned not for the spiritual perfection, but the well-being of people, like at some level, that's where the conflict sits. The conflict sits in the Orthodox world is if you fully grasp the experience by listening to queer people, then you no doubt want their well-being, then you get stuck with how it is that the tradition can require this, and your concern for their well-being would require that. So we've interviewed all these rabbis, and some of them we would call like Haredi formalists, and basically they claim it must be that you can change a person from gay to straight, because God would never obligate a person to do something self-destructive. Their faith basically leads them into it's impossible to be gay in some kind of innate way, and that's how Haredi largely, not completely, but largely do this. The communities that we more often deal with are those in the middle. And I would call these people the conflicted traditionalists, which means if you look, Nati Helfgott put together a group of Orthodox rabbis who signed a really forward-thinking document for its moment that is completely self-contradictory. Because on one hand, they want to sustain deep commitment to the tradition, and on the other hand, deep commitment to the well-being of human beings they care about. And when you put those two things together, you get this conflict of how do I ask a 16-year-old to be celibate for a lifetime and not imagine I'm harming him? So like once you get that, you can't assume that people can change, because that's just not what psychologists and what therapists and doctors claim. Once you accept that that's a reality that you can't fight against, then you're stuck with this inner conflict. And then there's a group of younger rabbis, or even some of them who are older, who are just coming to this conclusion that homosexuality is not, a character flaw or a demonic possession, And it's not even an illness. It's just how some people are. It's green eyes, it's left-handedness. And for these rabbis, I call them the generous Orthodox, they are coming up with incredibly, like they're admitting their conflict. That's like the first step. Like they say, I'm going to find a way to affirm you as a person and to get that you need love. And I do not have a great answer for the halachic problem that I share with you. So that response, not, making the problem, the halachic problem disappear, which is hard for an Orthodox rabbi, but admitting that I am with you in that question. And I too do not know how a just and loving God makes you gay and gives you no reasonable life. The conflicted traditionalists they have trouble admitting that the tradition could cause that much pain. And they end up saying both sides of this coin, often getting caught. And so that's our portrayal is, we were trying to figure out the strategy for the Haredim is just storytelling. Right? The people who are just stuck, just tell our stories and let them come up with the consequences. The people in the middle who are conflicted but not admitting it, just keep pointing to them how much they care about the well-being of the people who are part of their community, and how does the halachic advice they're giving serve that end. And then the people who are, I would say, the generous Orthodox, who are already very much our allies, our job with them is to support them, protect them from the communities that might threaten their authority, and allow their voice to grow in strength and in depth.
I'd like to add also, I see that there's something in the chat, Joy. Is it okay? I want to refer to it and reference what Steve was just saying, that to me, the most painful thing is when a rabbi gets to be the decision maker on whether a family is going to be divided or not. And so, Steve just presented 3 different models, and maybe it's breaking down generationally, but it's also like different styles and different beliefs from our rabbis. And, they have a choice to sort of filter what they think they know about what God wants and the Torah says to like the reality on the ground. So one parent, and I feel like we're having a little parent family reunion here on the chat. It's really beautiful. There's a bunch of Ishal parents. So one parent writes, I'm beyond this inner conflict with my child, but the conundrum for many Orthodox parents is that the lesson of Orthodoxy is that we must love God more than anything else. I love my child, but God's word comes first. So I had exactly this in my family with the different shades of Black, meaning different kinds of Orthodoxy amongst my siblings. When it came time for me to have a wedding or a celebration of my finding the person I wanted to live my life with, I have 5 siblings, and they each chose a different way to respond to that based on their own internal belief system. And the one that said to me, I love you and I love the Torah and I love God, but I have to listen to God over listening to you. It took us years. I didn't speak to her for a year. I was like the favorite aunt, I had done everything that I could do to be close to her and her 6 children. And they were my family. And that took the most repair. And like to have to present that as a choice to somebody is so incredibly cruel. And we have like Haredi, meaning ultra Orthodox rabbis, who will just lay down the law, knowing, or maybe not so knowing, that they are about to split up a family. And like, how dare you do that? What are you trying to do? Have a child lose their parent? Like, the choices that they're presenting are just unconscionable in the name of the Torah, in the name of halacha. And, that's not the Judaism, that's not the Orthodoxy that I learned about.
Would this be a good time, Joy, to reference the text, or I can even refer to it without going inside?
I think given the time, that would be the express version is probably the way to go.
The text, I mean, there are many, there's a book that, that I wrote about this, but I would say that the text that I would say just right to the center is this wonderful character called Daniel the Tailor in the Midrash. And the rabbis are learning the the book of Ecclesiastes that talks about oppressors, and it's terrible. The oppressed have no power, and there's no one to comfort them. And this Tailor stands up and says, I'm going to interpret that. And he says, the oppressed are mamzerim. They're people who are born of an adulterous or incestuous marriage. They did nothing wrong themselves, but they can't marry into the Jewish people, and therefore they're condemned to a life of celibacy, right? And he says, this isn't fair, and they are called the oppressed. And who are the oppressors? The rabbis, who interpret this text to exclude them from the community and from the ability of intimacy and companionship. And since there are no comforters, he says, I'm going to put words in God's mouth, God comforts them. The fact that a Tailor challenges the rabbis to claim that the law has to be interpreted and applied in ways that do not cause tragedy and ultimately don't become oppressive. It's not only that a Tailor said it, it's that the rabbis record that Tailor's voice in their midrash. They canonize a critique which says that the law has to be livable and cannot be allowed to become oppressive. So I think that this is one of many resources that we are using as a community to claim that choice between loving God and loving your child need not be true, and that there are other ways for the tradition to manage those verses and to find a way to help, the community make room for all its children.
Thank you. That was the Hillel on one leg version. That was admirable. That was fantastic. I know you would never do this, but when you were talking about the different rabbinic responses, I was imagining a Haggadah where the four children were the, four different Orthodox rabbinic responses to this problem. And it feels to me like the thread, okay, we're out of time here and not out of great conversation, but I heard two different things, which I don't think are a binary difference. I don't think it's either or, but I'm wondering what you would say about them. One is, I heard you say just now that Daniel the Tailor is saying a law where the interpretation of it leads to an oppressive situation, we need to rethink that oppression is a bug, not a feature of the Torah and God's will. If we are interpreting Torah and God's will in a way that leads to oppression and suffering, we need to take that as a warning sign, the way you would take pain in the body as a warning sign. Another thing that I heard you saying, particularly around the conflicted Orthodox and the way you work with them, is a little bit different. It's more saying the crucial thing is to never let the reality of human lives, the way law is lived in individual lives and families, never let that be lost. Never just focus on tradition, halakha, the law, the community in general, and let go of the reality on the individual level. And
yes, I would say both of those things are true, and there's no question that that tandem of commitment to the memory and to the community, alongside commitment to the individual life of of each and every unique person, is, I think, central to Jewish tradition from the beginning.
Thank you. It's breaking my heart that we're out of time here, but I am so grateful for what both of you have said and for your being here. I'm hoping that everybody has copied the links to Eshel and the incredible resources that are there, and will join me in supporting the work that you're doing. Thank you so much. And I want to invite everybody, including, I know there are a lot of folks who are here, first timers who are here for Stephen, Miriam, but I want to invite you back. Next week, we will be hearing from Rabbi Becky Silverstein who is a founder of Bein Kodesh L'Chol, a Jewish communal project in Jamaica Plains, Massachusetts, and chair of the boards of the Jewish Studio Project and Svara, a traditionally radical yeshiva, who's been thinking about and experimenting with his own leadership for 20 plus years. And our conversation will be called Leading from Between, Leadership Lessons of a Trans Rabbi. And Becky is also deeply enmeshed now in supporting Black Lives Matter and the work of the protests for justice and transformation of a different kind of tradition, the white supremacist tradition in the United States. So I hope you'll all join me next week. And Miriam and Steve, I know I speak for everybody in just saying thank you for being here and for your words, but thank you even more for your work. You truly have changed and are changing the world.
Thank you so much, Joy. Thanks for having us. It was great to be here with you and
It was a pleasure.
everyone.